Well, welcome back. This is class 3 of the AQS Let's Quilt with Bonnie, and we're doing 6 panel quilts in 6 weeks. Today's class is all about adding blocks to your quilt to make it bigger. It's pretty easy to put some borders on and make us a wall hanging, but what if we want that so we can snuggle up with it? So I'm going to walk you first through the process that I used to figure out what I wanted to do with this panel that's called Wildflower Farms. I started with, I work with electric quilt to do all of my designing. It saves lots of cutting of fabric that you maybe didn't want to cut up, and I'll show you exactly what you can do. So I know a lot of us have been doing delectable mountains. And so I thought, well, what happens if I put a delectable mountains border all the way around the quilt? And then add some more borders on it to make it bigger. Oh, that didn't do too much for me. So I thought, okay, so what if I do a design using half square triangles that I can play with? Well, this is okay, except that do you see how the center isn't big enough for me to do the same thing in all 4 corners? So I passed on that one. All right, so then I did quarter square triangles. And on this one, I just want to point out, I was using some of the colors out of the panel itself. And to me, this color is way too light. You want to really try to focus that attention right into the middle. So that wasn't one that I chose. This is nothing more than the attic windows block that I put all the way around. Okay, so now I thought, what if I add some piece blocks on the side and on the bottom? Well, you can see here I have a skinny little green border and a skinny little tan border around there. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks. Well, so the sizing wasn't right. And you'll notice that I pulled those colors in that 9 patch right out of the quilt. All right, so I sort of liked the blocks. So then I decided, okay, so let's see what happens if I put like a pinwheel block on it. And so I've got 6 there and I've got 6 here. And you can see I have this skinny little tiny, and it's smaller on the sides than on the bottom, on the top and the bottom. So that wasn't quite right. So I changed the size of the framing border around the center. But to me, that was just a little bit too wide. I needed that amount of space to make these blocks fit right. These are 8-inch blocks. And how do you determine what size to make those blocks? What I did was I measured some of these elements right here in the panel. This big poppy is almost 10 inches across. One of these sunflowers is a little over 6 inches across. So I felt pretty comfortable that I could go somewhere between 6 and 10 inches. So that's why I chose 8. And I also measured this part of the truck. And again, it was like 10 to 11 inches. So I wouldn't overwhelm it if I put 8-inch blocks on it. But now I have to make them fit. Okay, so I got this border on here to make them fit, but I thought it was too wide. So I went one step farther and I split that border into the dark green that I'm putting out here on the outside edge. And then that was 1 inch wide, finished. And then the tan part is 2 inches. And I thought the scale of that looked pretty good. The next thing is to choose our fabrics. And we're going to take a short word from our sponsors. And when we come back, I'm going to show you exactly what fabrics I chose and how we put this quilt together.
Panasonic.
As any artist will tell you, hitting the perfect notes means finding the perfect instrument, Bernina. So get the machine that always hits the right chord and start making beautiful music together. Bernina, made to create.
Okay, so now let's talk about what color of fabrics we want to use. You can see that I have in this panel, I have bright yellows. I have the tannish color in the crop back here in the field. We have the white clouds. And I want you to pay attention as you're looking at some of these panels on Facebook. There's a couple different Facebook groups out there. One's called Panel Quilt Ideas, and I think the other one is Panel Quilts. Lots of good panels being sewn out there. But I want you to pay attention to the colors they choose, because on this particular one, I really felt like I couldn't use the yellow, and I didn't want to use anything that was as light as those clouds, because I really wanted the design to focus on the panel itself. And so that was why I chose the tan color, like from the field, and so that's my lightest color. And then my next two fabrics are the light green and the red. And I actually took my panel to Hancock's. You know, we live here in Paducah, and you'd think I'd be in Hancock's all the time. I haven't been in there for quite some time, of course, because of the pandemic. But golly, I found this red fabric, and it just pulled the colors right out of that poppy that's right in the front. So that was one of them that I chose. And then I really felt like I needed a dark, and so I used the dark green to frame it to begin with, and then on the outside edge. Now let me talk just a little bit about where to put these pieced blocks, because we do have some choices on that. We can put the blocks all the way around, and that kind of makes for a busy border if you do that. You could tell that by some of my pictures. So I chose to put them on the side. So do I put them on the left side and the bottom, or do I put them on the right side and the bottom, or maybe the top and the right side? Well, here's how I look at it. We're trained to read from left to right. So I chose to put my pieced blocks on the left side and on the bottom. That kind of starts your eye to look at the quilt on the left-hand side, and then your eye focuses and stays right there on the panel. And I put them on the bottom because that just gives a little bit of weight to the bottom, and I accomplished my goal because I was able to increase the size to make it a throw size so that I could curl up under it if I wanted to. Okay, so let's talk about making this particular quilt. The first thing I did was make the pinwheels. And of course, I have 6 pinwheels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pinwheels on the left. And if I made them 8 inches, then I needed to make sure that my quilt was 40 inches from top to bottom. And conversely, I have 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this space. And again, that means it has to be 40 inches. So that's how I scaled the size of these two borders. My panel measured 34 inches finished. You know, when you're working in design, you always want to work in finished size. So that's what I did. And so then I knew I needed to add 6 inches onto that to be able to get to 40 inches for the width. And that was why I made the first border is 1 inch finished, and the second border is 2 inches finished. So I've added 3 inches and 3 inches, that's 6. Add that to the 34 inches that the panel measures, and I have my 40 inches. So I'm pretty comfortable now that it's going to fit just the way I want it to when I get these piece blocks all made to sew on there. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about making these pinwheels, and I'm going to give you a real easy way to do it. We're going to take one more word from our sponsor, and when we come back, I'm going to show you how to make those pinwheels.
Tracy's Tables has all of your custom sewing table needs. Visit tracystables.com to see the complete line of unique tables, carts, and shelves. And all of Tracy's tables are made in the USA.
Okay, we're going to use the 8 at a time method for making half square triangles to make these pinwheels. And to make all 12 blocks that go in this quilt, you're going to cut 6 each of, I did in the red and in the light green, and put those right side together. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my ruler corner to corner, both directions here on the red one. And I'm using an iron away marker. And then I'm going to draw it the other direction. So now I have a big X. What we're going to do then, we'll take that to the sewing machine, and I've already done a sample here for you so that I could just show you. You don't need to see me sew 4 lines of fabric. I've sewn 1/4 of an inch on both sides of those diagonal lines that I drew. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our rotary cutter. Oh no, actually I'm almost showed you wrong. First thing we have to do is we have to cut it horizontally and vertically. So once you've sewn those, we're going to cut the block apart. And I'm going to measure 5 inches from the bottom, and it should cross right smack in the middle of the block. We're going to do it that direction. Oh wow, I don't know if I can do this. I think it'd be easier to turn the block, and we'll just do that. And I guess we'll come back and we'll cut this again because I didn't cut it. That's one of the problems with trying to cut when you're sitting down, is that you really need the pressure. There we go. You really need the pressure of standing up. That's how they made the rotary cutters, so that we'd be in a standing position. All right, so now I'm going to lay this back together, get my centers matched up. So I cut it horizontally. Now I'm going to cut it the opposite direction, and so I'm laying the 5-inch line on the base. Okay, so now I have 4 sets of half square triangles. So just like you would do with any half square triangle, you're going to cut on the diagonal line. So each of these is going to give us 2. For a task like this, I like my 12-inch ruler if you're going to have to cut very many of these. All right, so there I have 8, and that's enough to make 2 pinwheel blocks. So we need 12 altogether, so you're going to make six sets of these. Now, I do just want to show you what we're going to do to press these. And I always lay them so that the dark side is up, because if you press the seam allowance to the dark side on all of these triangles, you will be able to nest every seam that you have to put together to make this quilt. So I like it so that I can just pick them up, grab the dark, and whatever side you pick up is the direction that that seam allowance is going to fall. So we will set the corner, and while it may look like I'm sliding, I'm actually lifting that iron so that I don't mess up my bias seam that goes down the middle. So again, we're going to set the corner, and go with the direction of the grain. And you can see how I'm stacking these. I'm going to stack them in 4s. That's 3. And here's 4. And so that's enough to make 1 block. And we'll do the same thing with all the rest of these. And so you can see how quickly I was able to make enough half-square triangles to make 2 of my 12 pinwheel blocks that I need for this quilt. All right, I'm going to reset the stage here while you take a short word from our sponsors, and I'll be right back, and we're going to have a look at this quilt.
The Ironmatics Space Saver is an award-winning ironing board. It's ergonomic and user-friendly. Strap your iron directly to it and hang it behind a door or in a wardrobe to keep it hidden out of the way. Visit ironmatic.com to get yours today.
Okay, you can see I have done a little bit of work in advance, so I'm going to walk you through what you have to do. Sometimes to save on the amount of fabric that you need, if you sew the side borders on first and then the top borders on, particularly in a rectangle quilt like this, you won't need quite as much fabric. Now, I will tell you that on the tan one, I had to seam, well, I'm not finding it right here, it must be at the bottom. I had to add a piece on to the tan because my fabric wasn't quite wide enough or long enough. I needed like 2 more inches. And so let's talk about doing those seamings in your borders because there's nothing wrong with them. I did have to seam the long one for the green. And I just kind of tried to match up some of the dark and light spots that were in the print. If you had a print that needed to be matched, I would lay it on top and fold the end under so that you could actually get it in exactly the right spot to be able to match the print if you needed to do that. Now, on these, I did just a straight seam across and opened up the seams in those borders. Sometimes, depending on what kind of a quilting design I might choose, sometimes I'll do a diagonal seam like you would do if you were sewing binding strips together. On this one, I just sewed them right straight across. Okay, so to make this border and this border, I can't stress enough how you need to measure. And so what I did was I folded it in half. I folded the panel itself in half and measured it. And then how big do you make those borders? In your handout, there's a formula for you to be able to do that, but it's very easy. We're going to take the width of the panel, finished width. Again, we're working on design. We want to do finished width. And then we're going to put a border on this side and we're going to put a border on that side. So you have to have 2 times the finished width of this border. So we need a seam allowance, don't we? For this particular quilt, I added on 1 inch for seam allowances. That just gives you a little bit of fudge factor. All right, so we're going to measure and then I folded in half. So if this measured 34 inches, which is what the finished size of this was, I folded it in half so that half of 34 would be 17, okay? And then I have my seam allowance there. All right, this border finishes 1 inch. I have to have 2 seam allowances, so I have to have it cut 1.5 inch times the measurement that would be lengthwise or the width. I have blanks in your handout so that you can write those numbers down. And because I fold them in half, I wrote down the finished width of the panel. And then I wrote 1/2 equals 17 1/4, so that I could fold my strips in half and cut them that way. And I'm going to do that here in a minute for the outside border for you. So you're going to sew the green ones on the sides, and then you're going to sew them on the top. And you're going to then come back and you're going to measure again, fold it in half lengthwise to get the measurement for the tan one. And sew it on, fold those out, come back and measure for this one. All right, now I told you that I had this size perfectly so that I could make my 8-inch blocks of the pinwheels. And you know what? It doesn't always fit, but I have to tell you, this one I had it sized perfectly so that I needed 48 inches this way and I needed 40 inches across the bottom to put these on. And that would be 40 1/2 and 48 1/2 so that you have seam allowances, because we've got seam allowances out here. So I've already sewn. I sewed the pinwheels on the left side, and then I sewed the pinwheels on the other side. And so next I'm going to show you how I measure so that you can see exactly what I do. And I'm going to sew on the side borders first. Now, I don't know if you paid attention to my picture, but I made borders 2 different sizes for this outside border. I've already pre-cut my strips. But when I went to put the outside border on, I thought that it looked better having a 2.5 inch finished border on the left side where I have these blocks. And then on the opposite side and on the top, I ended up with a 4.5 inch. Now, I don't know about you, but I do send some of my quilts out to be quilted by other people. Whenever I do that, I usually add on at least an extra 1/2 inch so that when you get the quilt back, that you're able to trim that quilt down and make sure that your edges are all straight and your corners are square. One time in my class, I had some lady who was really upset because she had sent her quilt to a quilter, and when she got it back, you know, sometimes they're not completely straight, and depending on how many diagonal seams they put on those quilts, that kind of pulls the fabric up a little bit. So I said to her, well, what did you have on the outside edge? And she said, I had a row of piece blocks. And I said, you know, that isn't fair to your quilter to put a row of piece blocks on the outside of that quilt. Because it is going to move a little bit. Well, she was really upset, but it was a good lesson for me, and I pass it on whenever I can, so that anybody who's going to have a machine quilter do it, you really need to pay attention and put a plain border or a tone-on-tone border or a print that doesn't make any difference. And then you need to make sure that you tell your quilter that the outside border, don't make a design that I'm going to cut off something on the edge when I straighten it. Make sure that you have that in her brain as she's thinking about what she's going to quilt. You know, a lot of times I have maybe a little bit of an idea what I want, but then I just tell them, I trust you, go ahead and quilt it. Okay, so here's the length of my quilt. And so I'm going to measure, and I'm measuring from the seam line here because I folded it in half, right? And so when I get to there, okay, so to this point I have 24 inches. And now I need to see what I have out here on the outside edge, and that's 4 1/4. So I'm going to write that on my sheet. 1/2 equals 24 plus 4 1/4, or 28 1/4. That's half. Okay, so that tells you that this is going to measure 56.5 inches with the outside seam allowances on it. So 56.5 inches is the length. Okay, all right, so the next thing I need to do is I need to cut my borders to that length. And I've already pre-cut. My fabric wasn't as long as I thought it was. I'm going to take a short break and I'll be right back and we'll see about putting this border on the quilt. I'm going to have to piece it together first. Okay, so I added on some pieces. I thought I had 1.5 yards of fabric here, which should have been enough. But obviously I didn't measure to make sure that I had 1.5 yards. So let me show you how I do it. Now I told you that I need to measure this so that I get my 24 inches. And I'm going to make a mark, and then I need to add on 4.25 inches to make it 28.5. So we'll get 1/4 inch. So you can see I don't have very much that I have to trim off. Okay, so now this narrow one goes on the side with the pieced blocks on it. I've already cut the big one so that it's the right size too. One goes on the right and the other goes on the left. So the narrow one, and now I'll tell you what you have to make sure when you piece a border like this, that you pay attention to which is the right side of the fabric. I had one of my borders that I pieced all pinned on and I had it upside down. So that's a warning to you. Okay, so we're going to put the narrow one on the side that has all of the pieced blocks. And anytime I sew with pieced blocks like this, I'm going to put those blocks on top so that you can pay attention to what happens to these seam allowances that we're going to sew over. And I have my special guide on with this 97D foot on this Bernina, so I'm going to put the pins so that they're facing out instead of sticking out here in the seam allowance. And I will just pin some of those spots where we've got all of those seam allowances coming over the top. I don't know, I bet some of you out there have just cut a strip of fabric and started at the top and sewed it on, and then cut it off when you got to the very end. And particularly if it's an outside border like this, you'll see that your quilt will just wave a little bit when you do that. It's really something you need to do, is you need to make sure that you measure and cut your borders to fit and pin them on so that you know that they're going to lay in there just like you expect them to. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and pin the other border on, and then when I get ready to sew, I can sew on one and then I can sew on the other. So now on this side that has the plain border, I've got the 5-inch wide strip. Okay, let's pay attention to where my joint is. Okay, so this is the right side. Okay, now I'm ready to sew. Now, you notice I'm going to use these snips as a holder for my fabric here, just to make sure that it doesn't catch that lip. Okay, there's one border on. Okay, so the next step is to press the border. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to heat set my seam line. It'll just make that border easier to turn when I get ready to press it flat now. So now I'm just going to press it from the top, and I'm just going to press and fold it out and press it. By pressing it from the top like this, a lot of times, sometimes you'll get a pleat right there where the fold is, and by doing it this way, I've eliminated that. I'm going to press it from the top and take away any chance of getting that little pleat right there. Okay, we got one of them pressed. Okay, so now I'm going to measure the other direction with these two borders on to be able to cut my other two borders for the top and the bottom. So again, I'm going to fold it in half just like I did before so that I can measure from here to here. Okay, so this time I have 24 and 3 1/4. So I need to cut my borders 27 1/4 would be half. Okay, so now I know from my mark I can measure 3 1/4 and cut it off. Okay, so that was 24 and 3 1/4 is right there. Now I could cheat since I already measured that one and lay it on top, but sometimes it doesn't come out quite as accurate as if you were to measure it like I'm going to do here. Okay, so that's 24. And now I need to add on 3 1/4 and cut. 3 1/4 is right there. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these two borders on just like I did the last. I'll pin them exactly the same way, sew them on, and when I come back we're going to put the design wall up and you'll get to see the whole quilt with all the borders on it. Well, here it is with all 4 borders on it. So we started with the 1-inch dark green. Then we went with the 2-inch in the tan, 8-inch pinwheels, and then on this edge we put a 3-inch strip for the border on the top and the bottom where we have the pinwheels, and a 5-inch strip on the top and the right-hand side. So I hope you're having as much fun making these panel quilts as I am. And I can't wait to see some of them quilted. And as you make yours, please post them on the AQS Facebook page. We'd love to see them there. And you know, this wouldn't be possible if we didn't have sponsors. So I hope that you will be sure to tell these sponsors thank you and patronize them when you can. That includes Bernina, who's provided the 770 Quilters Edition Bernina machine for us to use. Tracy's Tables, the cabinet that it sits in. Branson, where we'll be doing a show in March. Ironmatic with our special ironing board, and Panasonic cordless iron, and Starforest Quilts, who makes photo images in panels for quilts, just like we're making. And as a matter of fact, if you're in the market for a Bernina sewing machine, we have a special opportunity for you. I have a special postcard that I can send you to get a $100 rebate directly from Bernina. This isn't from your dealer. This is a card that I need to mail to you, and you'll find the information about that in the description. Send me an email and I'll make sure that we put a card in the mail for you so you can get that rebate. It has to be purchased during the time of this class. So before December 14th is the deadline. Also in the description is the link to go register. All of these sponsors that I just told you about are providing some wonderful prizes, and some of you are going to win those prizes, but you have to go register. So be sure to go to quiltweek.com/letsquilt, and under the class 6 you will find the registration button so that you can go get yourself registered, and somebody's going to win those prizes. If you're not yet a member of the American Quilter Society, I would encourage you to join. We are the largest quilting organization in the world, and we have some great new things coming up very soon, including a brand new website. So we'd love to have you join us, and you can take advantage of all of the benefits of being a member of the world's largest quilting organization. Well, all right, so we've finished now our third panel. Next time we'll be working with a photo image in a panel. I can't wait to have you see that, and we're going to put miters on 3 borders. Can't wait for you to see it because it's going to be a really special one. Every one of these classes is going to have a different technique for you to use in your panel quilts. And gosh, if you've already gotten started, you should have at least 3 Christmas presents now going, and we'll have 6 by the time we're all done. So until next time, be sure to join us on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m.